Okay, now here's two classic examples right here, this painting and this one, that are some absolutely gorgeous paintings of something that would never happen. Here again, the artist took liberties. There is way too much sail for these kind of wind conditions. If you notice these sails here and over here, we have some sails. They're called studsails or stud sails. And the only time that they ever have those up is when there's no wind at all and they're trying to catch every breath of wind just to make the ship sail. If they have sails up like this, they're going to lose their mast in about 1 minute. So it's way too much sailing. They're gorgeous paintings though. Now I can show you down here the type of sails that they should have up when these wind conditions do exist. Now this is the kind of sail that they should have. See how they've reduced the sail? And in fact, even this sail here would possibly be too much sail up under those wind conditions that are over there at the other painting. These are the David Thimgen paintings, and they have to do with the lumber trade. And if you notice, there's lumber in this one, and that one. And David Thimgen was born and raised in Chino, California. And he loved to paint river scenes and stuff like that. So anyway, there's lumber in this one. This one here, there's a lumber schooner, like this lumber schooner here. And this is Northern California. They're bringing the lumber down and putting it on the lumber schooner. Now this one here again, there's lumber in it with a lumber schooner, similar to this lumber schooner right here. Now as I said, he was born and raised in Chino, California. And he was having after he passed away, his wife came in here and she gave a talk. And she's a painter under her own right and her own name. And anyway, she was saying that he was having trouble painting an ocean scene. And so she told him, well, just paint it like the last time you saw it. He says, I've never seen the ocean. And so she says, well, if you're going to paint the ocean, you got to go look at it and see what it looks like. So anyway, she took him down to the ocean. They got on a boat, took him out, and showed him the ocean and versus the coastline and so on and so forth. Then he came back and he finished the painting, and this is the painting right over here. So that he really, with just looking at the ocean one time, he really captured John Stobart paintings. And John Stobart is an English artist, and he's living yet today. And he does absolutely gorgeous paintings, and he gets all the reflection and everything of the sun and so on and so forth. Now, I had a very interesting time with this picture. This is the Thames River running through London, and I was showing a group around here a few years ago, and there was this little 13, 14-year-old girl in the group. And anyway, I started naming off these buildings here because we have the Parliament building, we also have the Admiralty. Suddenly she just starts naming off all the buildings. And I said, well, are you from London? And she says, no. I said, have you ever been there? She said, no. I said, well, how do you know all those buildings? She said, here it is on my iPod. She just punched in the map of London, and it showed her what all the buildings were. So you got to be ready for anything when you're showing people around the museum. Now, this painting over here, he painted for many years, and one time he finished his painting, and his son looked at it and he says, "Well, Dad, you got me stumped." He says, "Where's the bottle?" He says, "What bottle?" He says, "You always put bottles in your paintings." He says, "No, I don't." And unbeknownst to him, or without purposely doing, he'd paint a little bottle just as a little doodad. Now on this painting here, there's a little tiny bottle right here, and you can't see it from where that camera is, but anyway, if there's a blow up of that area, you'll see a little tiny bottle. This painting over here is a painting of San Francisco during the gold rush. And I looked and looked and looked, and I never could find a bottle in this painting. And one day, somebody came to me and they said, "Well, I know where the bottle is, but I have to describe it to you. It's a round bottle with a long neck, and basically you see the cork." I said, "Well, where is it?" And right over here, there's a little tiny, looks like a cork, and he said, "There's the long neck and the little bottle." And I said, "Well, if you say so." I couldn't see it, but a lot of people do see it immediately. And somebody else came to me and they said, "Well, where's the bottle?" And the guy says, "Right here in the wheel." And so anyway, I can see that one. But then another person came to me and said, "There's a little bottle right up in here." Now I can't see that one either. So anyway, it's up to the beholder if you can see the bottle or not. But anyway, this one may have a lot of different bottles. But getting back to the painting, if you notice the lights coming out of the ship here, and the reflection of the moon over here, and here there's a reflection coming off of these lights out into the mud. I mean, this is an absolutely gorgeous painting. It's a classic example of the type of thing that he does. And as I said, he is still painting yet today. He was out here a few years ago and gave a talk. And to show you what kind of a painter he is and how he does his work, come lunchtime, they took him out to lunch. And he was gone for 1 hour. And during that 1 hour, he was sitting at the dinner table, eating his meal, drinking, talking to people, and he was doodling on a napkin. Well, they kept the napkin. Now, mind you, this is only 1 hour of painting. Okay? And here's the napkin on the wall right here. And it is absolutely gorgeous.
You can get some close-ups later.
Now, on this wall here, we have Thomas Hoyne paintings. Now, Thomas Hoyne was a commercial artist, and he did all kinds of things like the Jolly Green Giant and so on and so forth. Now, my understanding is he got ill, and the doctor really didn't give him too many years to live, so he decided to just start painting, not the commercial stuff, but what he was really interested in painting. And his interest laid in nautical things. And this painting right here, I always ask the people, have you ever seen that painting before? And most people say, no, but it's a gorgeous painting. I said, well, it's on our front window. And as you come in the front door, it's on the left-hand side, and it covers the whole window. So anyway, this is called the Widowmaker. And as you can see, some of these guys out here on the thing are really flirting with death. Okay? Now, in his workshop, he had a large sandbox, and he used to put cat litter in this sandbox and then form it and take a very large ship model, shove it into the cat litter, and then he'd get back and look at different angles. Once he decided where he was going to take his picture, He put a mark on the floor and set an easel with a blank picture frame that had strings on it. And they were all lettered and numbered because he was fanatical about proportions. If you look at his paintings, I mean, they almost look like a photograph. Everything is exactly proportional to each other. Now, once he did that, then he stepped back farther and he looked at the painting and he says, okay, this is where I want to take my painting. Well, he had a quadro pad with exactly the same number of lines that are on the picture frame. And he'd say the top of the mast is at 14W, and this is at 3A, and so on and so forth. And that's the way he got all of his proportions. Now, I was explaining this to one of the guys in our ship model club some time ago. And his name is Sergio Argonis, and he is an artist for Mad Magazine. And anyway, I was explaining, and the painting that we were looking at, there was a powerboat and also a sailboat. And the sailboat was closer than the powerboat. And so Sergio says, no, he didn't use a sandbox or anything. I said, well, how do you think he did it? Well, he says, this is the way he did it, and he actually did a cartoon of it. And here's the sailboat, and here's Thomas Hoyne on the sailboat, and he's painting a picture of the powerboat. So anyway, he did that for us. So it's just sitting here. So anyway, Thomas Hoyne did absolutely gorgeous paintings. These three paintings that are right here are only an example of the stuff that he did. Okay, this is a Liberty ship from World War II, and it's still in existence today in San Francisco Bay. And it's the Jeremiah O'Brien. And Jeremiah O'Brien was one of our American heroes. He is awarded winning the first sea battle of the Revolutionary War. Now, just before the Revolutionary War started, he found out that there was 3 lumber schooners coming from down in Boston, and they were going to confiscate a whole bunch of wood, and they were going to build a fort down there in Boston. And they were accompanied by a small warship with 3 cannons on it. Now they pulled into the harbor, and his Jeremiah O'Brien was a Scotch-Irish lumberjack. So he got a bunch of his buddies, and when they pulled in to the dock, they went aboard the lumber schooners and captured them. And so the guy that was in charge of the warship, he yelled ashore, he says, "What are you guys doing?" They said, "Well, we just captured your ships and we want you to surrender." And so he laughed at him, because with his 3 cannons, he could wipe out the whole town. So they pulled out into the middle of the harbor and anchored, trying to figure out what they were going to do. Well, this made O'Brien really mad, so he got his lumberjacks and they piled a bunch of lumber on the lumber schooners and went out to do battle with these guys. Well, when their gunners went to the cannons, his sharpshooters shot all the gunners off, and then they went aboard that ship and they captured it. So he is actually awarded with winning the first sea battle of the Revolutionary War. Okay, this is my cabinet, and these are ships in bottles, ships in light bulbs, and most of these are light bulbs in here. And I also put airplanes in, as you can see. Now, I put also carved people and put them in the bottles working on the ships. Now, the two of them that I like to talk about is the one up on top here. It's on a shelf. It's the one in the front. Columbus, according to the History Channel, Columbus wrote in his logbook about mysterious lights diving into the ocean, coming out of the ocean, and so they think he saw a UFO on his maiden voyage. Now, the one up in front here on the top shelf, there's up in the top of the clouds there is a silver thing, and that's a UFO, and that's Columbus's ship underneath it. And the sign up on top of the bulb, it says, "What's that?" Now, also over here, there is a ship that I built for one of our docents here, and she comes from Holland, and she she asked me if I could make something that looked Dutch. So anyway, I explained to her that the Dutch ships and the German and the American ships, basically the ships look the same. So she says, "Well, can't you make something that looks Dutch then?" And I said, "Yes." So what I did is I carved a wooden shoe and put a sail on it. And there's a little man in the shoe sailing it. So that was made for her. So I've also put river boats in bottles. I do all kinds of stuff. I also make the little tiny light bulbs up there with. Now that one was made for my daughter, and I was going to give it to her, and she says, "Well, Dad, I want it for my desk at work, but that one's too small." So I went and I made a larger one for her. So now we even got Mickey Mouse. I do the wood carvings and so on and so forth. This is the Port of Hueneme display that we have here. And the Port of Hueneme is down here about 5 miles. And it is the only deep water port between Los Angeles and San Francisco. Now, the two major things that come into Port Hueneme are bananas, which are up here, and automobiles. And this is an automobile carrier. And there's also a very large picture of an automobile carrier on the wall there. Now, the way that they bring automobiles on and off of the thing, this ramp here lowers down, and they drive all the automobiles, and they can bring in trucks and all kinds of construction type things. And so I'm not going to really go into this that much. And here's an automobile carrier, and at the very end of that, you can see the ramp that they drive the stuff on and off. And there's also another ramp on the side that they can bring the automobiles on. Now, every one of these pictures, though, does open up, and there's a complete story inside of every one of them. So I'm not going to go into that, but anyway, I just thought I'd show you that the Port of Hueneme is a very important thing here in California because it is the only deep water port between Los Angeles and San Francisco. The local Indians here were called Chumash Indians, and they used to make fully wooden canoes. They didn't make birch bark canoes like the Midwest did. They take redwood logs and pine logs, split them up into lumber, and they actually bored holes, and they tied the whole thing together using milkweed. And that's what this stuff here is this is milkweed. And this is a typical Chumash canoe, and they have the funny looking ears on the top of it. Now these two models right here are classic examples of the Chumash canoe. This one has the funny looking ears on it, and this one here does not have any ears on it. And this kind here, they called it a tiat, and it was sold to the Indians down south of here. And they purposely made them look different so that they could look out in the ocean and make sure the Indians down south of here, called Gabalino Indians, were not fishing in their area. They were very territorial. Now, another thing that I always talk about to the visitors coming in, I said, have you ever been to Morro Bay? In the middle of Morro Bay, there's this gigantic rock. And I asked them if they've ever gone out on the rock. And most of them say that they have never been out there, but they have seen the rock. Well, that happens to be a core out of a volcano. And there are 7 sisters up there. There are 7 volcanoes right around Morro Bay, and 3 of them are out in the ocean, and the other 4 are inland. And so this is volcano country. So, and the way that they made the boats, they took stones, they made sharp points on them, and they bored holes and tied the whole thing together using milkweed. So that's what this boat here has the ears, and this one does not. They were hunter-gatherers. Now, a little bit about navigation. The lines that are on the earth here, some of them are called latitude lines, some of them are called longitude. Now, if you ever get mixed up and you cannot remember which is which, just think of this as a ladder. You're climbing up and down the latitude lines, okay? And these going this way are called longitude. Now, the Columbus, when he sailed out of Spain here, and he told the court in Spain that he could, instead of going all the way across here, across this country, to pick up the spices in India and China, he could actually sail around the world to India and China and bring back spices for them. And so, anyway, he convinced them that. Now, a lot of people think that he got lost. Well, he didn't get lost at all, because they used to, in his time, they sailed by what they call the latitude. What they'd do is they'd sail north or south until they got to the latitude that they wanted to go to. Then they'd sail east or west using a compass to get wherever it was they were going to go. Now, what he did, if you look at the main latitude of India and China and bring it across, it's down around this area here. It's where the Canary Islands are, right here. And so he sailed south out of Spain till he got to the Canary Islands. Then he sailed all the way across until he was going to get to India and China. Well, that's the reason that when he sailed around here, turn the little earth around here, he ended up in the Caribbean islands, and that's the reason he called them Indians, is because he thought he could arrive in India. And so, anyway, he wasn't lost at all. If he'd have sailed on a diagonal like he was supposed to, he would have ended up in the Carolinas someplace. Now, a lot of people think that the earth was flat, or he thought that the earth was flat. Well, that's not true, because the first time this earth's circumference was calculated, it was calculated by a Greek mathematician about in the year 2000 BC. And the whole story about that is written in a couple of navigation books, one of them being, can't think of the name right now, so sorry. But it's written down about him, and he noticed that at high noon he was in a Sina, and there wasn't any shadow on a well. And he knew that the sun was directly overhead because there was no shadow. A year later, on the same date, at high noon, he noticed that there was a shadow cast from a building, and he knew that he was 500 miles away from Asina. So using the calculations and the measurement of the building and the shadow, he actually calculated the circumference of the Earth, and he was only 900 miles off.
Wow.
I mean, that is a complete story in itself. So the name of the book is Bowditch, and it's a book of navigation, and there's a whole article in there, probably 4 or 5 pages long, on all about that story. So now the first Spaniard to come here to California was Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo, and he sailed over here on the San Salvador. And there is a replica that has been made of the San Salvador by the people that run the museum down in San Diego. And that replica has come up here and parks right outside of our museum, and they're trying to make that a yearly event. Now, Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo, as I said, was the first Spaniard to come here to California, and due to a string of circumstances, he ended up dying here. And he's buried on one of our islands out here. We don't know exactly which one it is, but he got knocked down, and they think he died of blood poisoning from a wound that he got. Now, a lot of people don't realize that Francis Drake came here to California. And at the time he sailed to California, the Spanish and the English were not getting along. So every time he would pull into a Spanish port, he would sort of like act as a pirate. He would steal stuff and stuff like that. So once he sailed down around South America, came up here to California, he knew he better not go back that way because the Spanish would be looking for him. So he pulled into a place up above San Francisco called Drake's Bay, and it's named after him, naturally. And he repaired his ship, and then he proceeded to sail all the way around the world to get back home again. Now, we had a teacher that used to teach 4th grade school kids, and she was a docent here, and she was talking to her kids about Francis Drake. And this one little boy, now this is 4th grade, and he raised up his hand, and he kept shaking his hand in front of her, and she says, "What do you want?" And he says, "Well, I know about Francis Drake." Well, she says, "Well, I'm talking about Francis Drake, so just be quiet." And he kept raising up his hand. Finally, she says, "Well, what do you want?" He says, "I know about Francis Drake." She says, "Well, what do you know about Francis Drake?" "He's the first guy to circumcise the world." These are the 3 ships that Columbus had. And it's the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Now, the Nina and the Pinta did make it back to Spain. The Santa Maria did not. The Santa Maria went aground, and they had to take it apart. They made a fort out of it, and over the years the fort has completely disappeared, and so that's the way it goes. Now, there is a replica of the Nina that has been built and has come up here several times. And one time, the first time it came up here, it does not have a fife rail to tie the lines off on. What they did is they took and they put the cleats right onto the shrouds, which are the thing that holds the mast up, and they tied the lines off it. When it got up here, they had 3 of them that were broken. The cleats were broken, and so I proceeded to make new cleats for them. And so it has been repaired several times, but hopefully my cleats have lasted. Now, the Nina was the smallest one, And I mean, it's really small. It's only about 35 feet long. So you can see that it's how small those things are. So now it sailed from Spain down to the Canary Islands, and they ran through some storms, and the Pinta, which is the middle-sized one, it used to have a lantern sail on it like this, but due to the storms hitting it and everything, well, I'm sorry, it did have square sails, and due to the storms and everything, they got busted up, so they made it into a lantern sail. And they went back to the Caribbean islands to do that. This is the Mayflower. This is the one that the Pilgrims came over on. And it was somewhere in the 60 to 70 foot range. Now, the in-between decks is very, very small. It's only like 4.5 feet. And it had over 100 passengers on it. In fact, I think it was 100 passengers. And it also had 30 crew members. And in between decks was very, very small. And some of those people thought they ought to be able to lay down and take a nap once in a while. But there was not enough room. So anyway, it was a very uncomfortable ride. Now, it started out with actually 3 ships, all in the same group, and they headed out towards the United States or the New World. And the people on it, the Pilgrims, they were considered bad people. So they ran into a storm. They had to come back and have their ships repaired. And when they did that, the big dignitaries there in England wouldn't let them come ashore again. So they had to stay on the ship while it was being repaired, etc. Then they took out again. They ran into another storm, and one of the boats actually got busted up so bad that it never did come back with them. They actually sailed across with 2 ships. Now, according to the History Channel, now I'm saying this because I have no facts written down about this, but due to the storms that they ran through, all their water got tainted with salt water, and they were living on beer. And they got as far as the New World, and they ran out of beer, so they went ashore, and they were supposed to go to Virginia, but they never made it because they went ashore to brew some more beer, and the captain said, "Hey, you guys went ashore, this is it. This is as far as we're going to go." And so that's the reason they ended up where they did and not in Virginia. This is a Viking ship, and people start talking about who discovered America. Well, they always say Columbus did. Well, there's a long story about it, and it has to do with a World's Fair that was in New York, and it was started by a bunch of Italians. They built a ship of Columbus's Santa Maria, and at that time they said that he discovered America. Well, there's all kinds of proof that he didn't discover America, that the Vikings came first, and then a lot of people say, well, there were people here before the Vikings because a stone was found in a farmer's field. Now, I believe it was in Kentucky, but I'm not sure of the state. But that stone is in the Smithsonian today, and they have taken it off a display, and they have it locked up in one of their vaults. And they had it on display for many years, and it had hieroglyphics on it that they couldn't decipher. Well, it turns out that they finally did decipher it, because a rabbi came through and said the reason you can't read it, it's upside down. It's ancient Hebrew. And so they think that that dates back to the tower, or the time that King Nimrod was building a tower to heaven. And it was called the Tower of Babel. Okay? So that you will have to go into yourself. But the Vikings, there's proof that they got here up around Nova Scotia and stuff like that back in the 400s, 450 AD. And so that's the reason that the Vikings are so. Now supposedly the way that they got here though is that there was still an ice cap up there, and they followed the ice cap around, and so supposedly that is how they got here to Nova Scotia and so on and so forth. Okay, these are telegraphs, and they sit next to the guy that's steering the boat and so on and so forth. And they tell the signals down to the engine room to go backwards or forwards and how fast to go. Now, this particular one here came off of a military ship, because only military ships have what they call flank speed on it. Now, here's full speed. Full speed means go as fast as the ship can go without hurting the engine. Flank speed means disengage the governor and go absolutely as fast as you can, even if the engine does get hurt. And military ships can get into a situation where they got to get this ship out of here, otherwise we're going to get sunk, or we have to get to the battle, and regardless of whether the engine gets hurt or not. So that's what flank speed is. Now, I was showing a little group around here a few years ago. There was this little tiny woman, very, very small, and petite little thing, and she spoke so softly I couldn't even understand what she was saying. And so, anyway, but in this particular case here, I was telling about full speed and flank speed, and anyway, I said, and full speed means go as fast as the engine can go without the hurting it, and flank speed means disengage the governor, and she yells out at the top of her voice, and haul ass. This was a prop from Old Man in the Sea, and we were having a showing of that movie in our parking lot, and we were sort of having a little display about it and all that kind of stuff. And so anyway, the guy in Long Beach called up and said that this was a prop from that movie, and so we went down and got it, and after the show was over, we were going to take it back, and he really didn't want it back, so it's been sitting here ever since. Whaling display, and when the little kids come through here, I have them stand up here, and this is the lower jawbone off of a gray whale, and this is a rib bone, and these, then I have them point at their back, their vertebrae, and that's what these are. These are vertebrae out of a whale. And so it gives them an idea how large they are. And if they're little kids, I have them stand here and I tell them that they would fit right inside the whale's mouth. So they get very anxious about that. Okay, these are all our whaling instruments and the harpoons for going after them and everything. And they actually brought the whale alongside the mothership. And they had a platform built out so that they could tie the whale up, and then they would turn it over, and they would use these instruments here for actually cutting a long strip of blubber. And they had a block and tackle onto the rigging, and they would raise this thing up and as they raised it up, it would turn the whale over like that, and they would cut strips of blubber. Then they would cook them in a pot and get the oil and stuff. And that's what they were basically after, is the oil from the whales for using for all kinds of different things, lamps and all that kind of stuff. So, but these are harpoons. They're for killing the whale, and they these harpoons here are they hit the whale, and then the whale takes off because he doesn't like the harpoon in him. So as they call it, the sleigh ride, and the boat is being pulled along. Now once the whale is worn out and stops running, then they have another one of these that has a very long shaft on it, and they drive it into the heart to actually kill the whale. And then they have to power some way or other by its sail or by oars and pull it all the way back to the ship. Okay, this is the whaling boat that they went out after. This picture up here shows the whaling boats and also the mother ship. And this is the kind of boat that they went out after the whales with. Now the front rower here was also the harpooner. And the line here was tied on to the end of the harpoon, and it comes through a little pulley right there. Now, if the line was tied off up at the bow of the boat, and when they harpooned the whale, if he dove, it would pull the front of the boat down. So what they do is they have the harpoon, the rope at the end of the harpoon. It goes through a pulley here and goes all the way back, and it goes around this post here, and then it comes out of the bucket, goes around that post into the harpoon. And so when they harpoon the whale, if he immediately dives, instead of the front end of the boat being pulled down, the force is on this post back here, and the boat wants to go this way instead of down. So that is protection from the whale. Now these are all the whaling instruments, and as I said, the one on top here, you can see has a long spike on the end of it, and that's the one that they drive into the whale to kill the whale. Okay, this is all the whales. Now, whales are not fish. They're air breathers. They're mammals. Okay? Now, all the whales on this side, they have teeth like we do. All the whales on this side, they have the ballenes, and so they use the filtering to get their food. And down at the very bottom down there, it shows the different sizes in comparison to people and also dinosaurs and stuff like that. So all the ones on this side, they have the teeth, and I'll be showing you the ballenes in just a little bit. Or the ballenes are for these guys, and the teeth, the scrimshaw on the teeth are from the whale's teeth. Okay, these are binnacles, and here's one right here, and they're nothing more than a housing for a magnetic compass. If you look down inside here, there is a compass down in there. Now, when the cargo ship loads a cargo, it may or may not affect the magnetic compass. So what they do before they leave the harbor, they pull into an area that's marked on their chart, and there's what they call range markers up on hillsides. And they're buildings or signboards or something that have big X's on them. You can't miss them. They're painted different than anything else in the harbor. And if you get between this one and this one, and you're pointing in this direction, on your chart it gives a particular magnetic heading, which is a correct heading for that particular place. They look at their chart, look at the compass, and if it's off a little bit, that's what these two balls are for. They screw them in and out to adjust the compass to make it correct before they leave the harbor so they don't get lost at sea. Okay, this is our display of the La Jeunesse, and it was a cruise liner. And if any of you have ever taken a cruise, here's one that you shouldn't miss, because you can get $120 for an 11-day cruise. And the ship was originally designed back in the 1930s, and it was built and it cruised all over the world. And then during the Second World War, it was a troop transport. And there it was nicknamed the Lucky Star, because it sailed in every ocean in the world and never once did it get shot at. So it was a very lucky ship to be on. Now this wheel does not come off the La Jeunesse. This wheel is put here strictly as a thing just showing you what a wheel looks like. These air scoops came off the La Jeunesse. Now down at the bottom, the air scoops were up on deck, and they are hinged at the bottom so you can turn them around, because in real heavy seas and stuff, they can turn them around backwards so that the ocean and stuff won't come into them. Now, the ship, it was called different names at different times during its lifetime. And in 1970, a group of people in Ventura purchased it, and they were going to make a gambling ship out of it and a hotel. Let the people go aboard, they'd sail out beyond the limit, and they would do their gambling and so on and so forth. And anyway, it was anchored in Ventura. Before that happened, it was anchored in Ventura. They couldn't get permission to turn it into a gambling ship because they were having trouble getting insurance, because all the cabins were made out of wood. So what they did is, when they were waiting for clearance and so on and so forth, they had it anchored in Ventura. A very large storm came up, broke loose from the anchor, washed ashore down at Port Hueneme. And it laid there for a couple of years, and people were climbing on board and stealing stuff off of the La Jeunesse. Well, some guy climbed aboard, fell overboard, and drowned. So the founding fathers told the owners, hey, we don't care what you do, but get it out of here. So they turned it over to the Navy. The Navy came in and cut all the superstructure, the cabins, off of it. Took them out a couple of miles, and if you look at your navigation charts, you'll see the La Jeunesse Reef. And that's where they took all the cabins and everything and dumped them into the ocean and made a fish house out of it. And all the fish go in and around there, so they started fishing. Now they have warnings out not to do any diving out there, because there's so many fish hooks and everything floating out there that it's extremely dangerous to dive and so on and so forth. Now, after they cut all the superstructure off of it, they came in and piled rock and everything, and they made the breakwater at Port Hueneme. Now, I understand, I have not been there myself, but I understand it has now been turned into a park. Now, there's all kinds of restrictions and everything on Scrimshaw these days. Who can sell it, how long you've owned it, all that kind of stuff. Now, supposedly, the only people that can actually sell whale's teeth and Scrimshaw legally are the Eskimos and stuff like that, because they have rights that the average person in the United States does not have. Now, what the sailors used to be gone for 2 or 3 years at a time on a whaling trip. And so they had a lot of off hours. So what they used to do is they used to make things that they could sell when they came into harbors to make extra money for themselves so they could have a nice time in the harbor. And anyway, these whale's teeth, they'd take a sharp instrument and they'd carve a design, then they'd smear ink on it. The ink will go down where the scribing is. Then they'd take a towel, wipe all the excess off. That's the way they ended up making scrimshaw. Now, some of these are whale's teeth, some of them are walrus tusks. So the long ones are more or less walrus tusks and stuff like that. They also did them on turtle shells. Now, I was showing a group around here a few years ago, and one of the people asked me how you made the scrimshaw, and I explained to him with the carving and so on and so forth and the ink. And after I got through explaining that, another person in the group says, "Well, is the whale dead?" And so, anyway, you got to be very explicit. Yes, the whales are dead when you do this. My name is Bob Little, and I was originally born in the Midwest, Iowa, and I moved to Bismarck, North Dakota, and then just before World War II, came here to California, and I've been living here in California ever since. I'm a ship model builder. I'm also a wood carver. I do all kinds of building things for the museum. I build furniture, I build models, model cases, and so on and so forth. I do ships in bottles. I do all kinds of different things. I've been a docent here at the museum since about 1978 or 1998. And anyway, I've had all kinds of experiences and so on and so forth. I've been in and out of different occupations all my life, so I can talk about all kinds of different things. I can talk about engineering. I was an engineer, mechanical engineer for quite a few years, and so that's about a story of my lifetime.